Chapter 22 Midnight Special. After repeating the trick with the two remaining misfits, we took a moment to gather our thoughts. Sophie, Terry, and I stood in the dimly lit tunnel, trying to shake off the lingering emotions of our encounters. Two of the misfits, redeemed and finally at peace, chose to move on. But Sam, a former engineer who had once roamed these very tunnels in life, decided to stay. His analytical mind and calm demeanour seemed to fit right in with our motley crew. "I think I'll stick around," Sam had said, his voice steady. "I've been lost too long. Maybe it's time to find some answers." Now, with Sam in tow, we navigated the darkening tunnels, the air growing colder and more oppressive as time inexorably ticked on. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation, the weight of the unknown pressing down on us. As we moved deeper, the frequency of passing trains diminished. Each one that did pass seemed to leave behind an amplified trail of energy, a shimmering residue that crackled with intensity. The usual alcoves we hid in offered less and less protection. The energy permeated everything, sending shivers through our spectral forms. "This is getting intense," Terry muttered, his voice echoing slightly. "Feels like we're being pulled somewhere." Sophie nodded, her eyes scanning the dark tunnel ahead. "I can feel it too. It's like we're being drawn in one direction." Sam added, "We should keep moving. Standing still isn't doing us any favors." With a silent agreement, we continued, the energy trails guiding us like ghostly breadcrumbs. The tunnel seemed to stretch endlessly, twisting and turning as if they had a mind of their own. The oppressive silence was occasionally broken by the distant rumble of a train, each one carrying a stronger, more palpable energy than the last. The closer we got to midnight, the more intense the trails became. The energy shimmered and pulsed, illuminating the dark walls with an eerie glow. It felt as if the very fabric of the tunnels was alive, reacting to our presence and urging us forward. As we ventured further into the maze of tunnels, the distant rumble of another train grew louder. The anticipation hung thick in the air, mingling with cold, making the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. The train approached, its energy building like a storm ready to break. I braced myself against the tunnel wall, knowing what was coming. The train roared past and I was immediately engulfed by the surge of energy. My vision blurred, the world around me dissolving into a rush of sounds and colours. Suddenly, I was no longer in the tunnel, but standing in a crowded hospital emergency room. Fluorescent lights cast a harsh glare over everything, and the air was thick with the scent of antiseptic and fear. Nurses and doctors moved frantically around me, their faces strained with tension. I looked down at my hands. They were covered in blood. My heart raced as I realised I was a doctor, desperately trying to save the accident victim lying on the gurney in front of me. The room was a cacophony of monitors beeping, voices shouting orders, and the anguished cries of the victim's family. I felt the young doctor's desperation and fear, the crushing weight of responsibility as he fought to save a life slipping away before him. Despite his best efforts, the patient's heart monitor flatlined, and a profound sense of failure washed over me. The vision was so vivid, so real, that I could feel the sweat on my forehead, the trembling in my hands, and the heavy ache in my heart. The young doctor stepped back, defeated, his face a mask of sorrow and exhaustion. I shared his agony, the bitter taste of defeat lingering as the vision began to fade. I blinked, and the hospital room dissolved, replaced once again by the dark, damp walls of the subway tunnel. My knees felt weak, and I leaned heavily against a wall, trying to steady my breathing. The energy from the train lingered, a haunting echo of the intense emotions I had just experienced. As the energy from the train began to dissipate, I tried to collect myself. The tunnel was silent once more, save for our collective, unsteady breathing. The air was still thick with the emotional residue of the visions. Terry was the first to speak, his voice hoarse and unsteady. I don't know what you guys saw, but that was intense." Sophie nodded, her eyes wide. "I was at a protest. It felt so real. The fear, the defiance, it was overwhelming." Sam, the calmest among us, took a deep breath. "I found myself back in my workshop the one I had before everything went wrong. It was like reliving my worst day there. The frustration and the sense of loss were suffocating. I could still feel the weight of the doctor's failure in my chest. I was a doctor, trying to save a life in the emergency room. The patient, he didn't make it. Terry looked around, his eyes searching the tunnel walls, as if they might offer some explanation. Why are we seeing these things? Is it the train, the energy they leave behind? It has to be, Sam replied. The energy is getting stronger, more intense. It's not just affecting us physically, it's pulling us into these visions. Sophie shivered. But why these particular moments? Why these memories? I shook my head, trying to make sense of it all. Maybe it's because these are moments of intense emotion, high tension. Could the energy be feeding off that? Sam nodded thoughtfully. Or maybe it's showing us something we need to confront, something unresolved. Great, Terry said dryly. Because what we need right now is more unresolved trauma. I managed a weak smile at that, grateful for Terry's attempt at levity. We need to keep moving. Staying here won't do us any good. We all agreed, the unspoken bond between us strengthening as we faced these haunting visions together. As we continued down the tunnel, the oppressive silence returned, broken only by the distant rumble of another approaching train. We braced ourselves, knowing we would likely be drawn into another vision, each of us silently hoping to find some answers, or at least some measure of peace in whatever came next. The tunnels seemed to stretch endlessly as we pressed on, the cold seeping deeper into our bones. The distant rumble of another train began to build, the anticipation almost unbearable. I could feel the energy around me growing stronger, more insistent. I took a deep breath and steeled myself for what was coming. The train thundered past, and once again I was swept away by the surge of energy. My vision blurred, and the world around me dissolved into a whirlwind of sounds and colours. Suddenly, I found myself right in the midst of chaos, the air thick with smoke and the deafening roar of flames. I was a firefighter, rushing into a burning building. The heat was intense, almost unbearable, and the smoke choked me with every breath. I could hear the cries of people trapped inside, their voices filled with terror and desperation. My heart pounded as I moved through the inferno, searching for survivors. I found a young mother and her 2 children huddled in a corner, their faces streaked with soot and fear. The mother clutched her children tightly, trying to shield them from the flames. I felt a surge of determination, a desperate need to save them. I reached out, my hands steady despite the chaos around me, and guided them towards the exit. The journey out was a harrowing one. The flames licked at us from all sides, the heat singeing my skin. The smoke was so thick it was impossible to see. But I kept moving, driven by the cries of the children and the mother's pleading eyes. We were so close to the exit when a beam collapsed in front of us, blocking our path. The mother screamed, her grip on her children tightening. I looked around frantically, trying to find another way out. The flames were closing in, the heat becoming unbearable. I felt the crushing weight of failure bearing down on me. I had to save them. I couldn't let them die here. With a burst of strength, I managed to find a small opening and led them through, guiding them to safety. The moment they were out, the building groaned and began to collapse. I was thrown backwards, the vision blurring as I was ripped away from the scene. I blinked, and the burning building faded, replaced once again by the damp walls of the subway tunnel. I was on my knees, gasping for breath, the emotional weight of the vision pressing down on me. My hands still felt the phantom heat of the flames, and the desperate cries of the children echoed in my mind. I struggled to my feet, the remnants of the vision clinging to me like a heavy shroud. The tunnel was silent, the air thick with the aftermath of the intense emotions I had just experienced. I glanced at my companions, seeing the same exhaustion and determination reflected in their eyes. The significance of the firefighter's actions lingered with me. Despite the overwhelming odds and the ultimate sacrifice he made, his bravery and determination were undeniable. He had faced the inferno with unwavering resolve, risking everything to save others. His courage in the face of such dire circumstances was something I couldn't easily shake off. Even though he didn't survive, His actions spoke volumes about the man and the selflessness of those who risked their lives to protect others. Shaking off the lingering effects of the vision, we continued to move through the tunnels. Despite everything, I couldn't help but feel a renewed sense of purpose. If someone could exhibit such bravery and selflessness in their final moments, then perhaps there was hope for redemption and courage within us all.